Hello, class. We are the Finch group, and today our presentation will be about whether deep sleep affects social cognition and attention and inhibition abilities.
Have you ever been told that sleep can help you live longer or that lack of sleep can actually kill you faster? Well, there is some background to those claims. Sleep has an important role in our development, immune response, and many psychological conditions. When we are sleep deprived, we are actually more susceptible to illnesses and diseases because our immune system is weakened. Sleep also contributes to the time it takes to recover from illnesses. Therefore, it is important to get a good amount of sleep to keep you healthy.
So sleep plays an important role in human cognition, affecting our executive functions, attention, and memory. While sleep aids in cognition, slow wave sleep, that is deep sleep, acts as a restorative process for the body and as a consolidation process for all information gained during the day. Sleep deprivation leads to a decline in performance in all of these functions. The duration of sleep for humans evolved in context with their environmental needs. However, changes in the environment and lifestyle habits has created a mismatch. This mismatch has led to increased sleep deprivation, which in turn impacts our cognitive abilities.
As we grow older, our memories are not the same as they were when we were younger. So anything that we can do to keep our memories alive and well is important. Therefore, sleep becomes an important factor in keeping our memories intact. Deep sleep specifically has been known to be essential in memory consolidation and restorative processes in our body, as previously mentioned. Executive functions play a key role in adapting to change in everyday life. The executive functions of inhibition and social processing are important to achieve our goals and maintaining relationships in our lives. They are also important functions for adapting to change in our lives.
Inadequate sleep is linked with decreased inhibition of responses and false alarms on go, no-go tasks. Go, no-go tasks test the ability to respond to one stimulus while also withholding responses to a different stimulus and are the main tests used to determine the executive function of attention and inhibition. It also disrupts the regulation of emotions by the amygdala and prefrontal cortex, leading to increased negative emotions and poor emotional memory. This paper measures inhibition by using gradual onset continuous performance test and perception of emotions through morphed face emotion identification task. Our hypothesis and predictions are as follows.
So we predicted that greater amount of deep sleep correlates to greater cognitive abilities as shown by increased performance in the social cognition and inhibition cognitive tasks. We also said that higher scores on the cognitive test will be shown in individuals that get a higher quantity of deep sleep, and lower scores will be shown in individuals that had a smaller duration of deep sleep.
So the methods of our experiment. First of all, we're going to need two materials that are necessary for accurate reproduction. The first is an aura ring, which is used to measure daily activity, calorie consumption, and sleep patterns. So for this experiment specifically, only sleep patterns will be recorded. The most notable of the sleep measurements being the duration of deep sleep. The other necessary material is a computer or any other kind of device with access to the internet in order to run cognitive tests that are found on the Harvard University operated website. As mentioned earlier, the cognitive tests are the morphed face emotion identification and the gradual onset continuous performance test. So the first test displays a person's face where they have an emotion and there's no other context given. So the subject then needs to determine whether the emotion was happy, angry, disgusted, or fearful. The second test requires the subject to focus on an image that is constantly changing between a city scene or an image of a mountain. And the subject must only press the spacebar when the city scene appears. So these tests measure a subject's ability in social identification and attention and inhibition respectively. So the experiment is to be ongoing for approximately a month, where the experimental and control conditions will be tested for 15 days each. So during the first half of the month, the experimental condition was tested. This is referred to as the candlelight challenge. the objective of the challenge being to recreate an environment where the human circadian rhythm is at minimal disruption. So this includes sleeping in a room with no source of stimulus, consuming your final meal at least 3 hours prior to sleeping, avoiding caffeinated drinks during the day, and wearing blue light blocking glasses when using technology, and a candle or a small like warm light lamp as the only source of light in the evening. So after going to bed and waking up under these conditions, the data is collected by the Aura ring, and it should be written down, and then the cognitive test will be performed shortly after, of which those scored results would also be noted. So when the 15-day mark has been achieved, you can now switch the condition from experimental to control. The control variable being just going to sleep like normal, how you did before the candlelight challenge. And then again, the Aura ring would collect the data with these new control variable results. And then also shortly after, the test will be done again. And then once the full month is over, comparisons can be drawn from the recorded data between the experimental and the control variables and how deep sleep has affected the cognitive test results. So the analysis is done via RStudio, which is a statistical program whose data will be input based on the entire student's population's results, and the population of students is this class. So using deep sleep as the main variable in this study, we can draw upon the differences in sleep efficiency in the experimental environment versus the control environment, and the distribution of the intention and inhibition and the social cognitive scores between both of them. Furthermore, using R, we will also be calculating the correlation coefficients and the p-values for each testable medium, and controlling for sex, sleep index, REM to non-REM sleep ratios, and the mood of the subject, relating the results back to whether the null hypothesis has been satisfied or whether the alternate hypothesis has been satisfied. So in our experiment, the p-value is set at 0.05, meaning that a statistical score below 0.05 supports the alternative hypothesis, and then a score above that would support the null. And then also for reference, correlation scores are interpreted as decimals, where anything above 0.7 is considered a strong correlation. And then anything between 0.4 to 0.7 is considered a decent correlation. And then anything below 0.4 is considered low to no correlation.
So the current box plot here is comparing the proportion of deep sleep individuals have gotten in the control versus the experimental group. So this figure shows that the experimental group received more deep sleep compared to the control group. The experimental group had an average of 1.75 hours of deep sleep compared to the control group, which only had about 1.55 hours. And now this second box plot compares the distribution of attention task scores between the control and the experimental groups. The experimental group had an average score of 77 points in the attention task, and the control group had an average of 74 points on the attention task. And this third box plot compares the distribution of social task scores in the control and experimental group. Again, the experimental group had a higher average of 46 points, and the control group had an average at about 44 points for these social tests. So the current figure here displays the regression of deep sleep and attention and social task scores, both in the control and experimental group. The two graphs on the left compare the regression of deep sleep and on attention task in the control group, and the one below that compares the regression of deep sleep and social task scores in the control group, while the two right-hand side compare the regression in the experimental groups. When comparing the attention task scores to the proportion of deep sleep in the control and experimental group, the scatter plot shows a small correlation in the experimental group of 0.144, but a negative correlation in the control group that is negative 0.252. When comparing the social task scores to the proportion of deep sleep, there is a small correlation in the control group of about 0.101, but there's a stronger or better correlation in the experimental group of about 0.213. Comparing the graphs in this figure and the correlational values, we see that the proportion of deep sleep has the highest effect on the social task scores and only a marginal effect on the attention task scores. So these scatter plots with the lines of best fit compare the proportion of deep sleep, which is on the x-axis, to the attention and social task scores, which is on the y-axis on each graph. The correlational coefficient for deep sleep and attention task scores is R 0.066, which is an insignificant correlation. And the correlation coefficient for deep sleep and social task scores are 0.322, which is slightly better, but it's still relatively insignificant. So here, the current graph measures attention using linear mixed effects. And the fixed effects are things such as sleep index, REM sleep, wake feel, and deep sleep that are used as a function of attention task scores. And as can be seen in this graph, the factors that had an impact on test scores were items such as sex, wake feel, and deep sleep. So deep sleep and not REM is a better predictor of performance on attention task scores, as well as good moods upon awakening. But sex is also a higher performance predictor on these attention tasks. Deep sleep had a p-value of 0.0117, and REM had a value of 0.2689. So this shows that deep sleep was a better predictor, but it still wasn't as strong. But an interesting fact to note about this model is that it suggests that being male has a better predictor of higher performance on the current task. And in this graph, the factors that had an impact on the test scores were again sex, wake feel, and deep sleep. And again, we see that deep sleep was a better predictor of higher performance, but ultimately items such as sex and wake feel were stronger predictors of better performance on attention tasks. Deep sleep had the p-value of 0.00291, while REM sleep had a value of 0.11105. And so this suggests that deep sleep is a better predictor, but again, ultimately predictors such as, or items such as sex and wake feel are better predictors. And this model also suggests that being male was a higher predictor of better performance on these tasks.
So here's our discussion part for this study. In our hypothesis, as previously mentioned, we hypothesized that there would be a significant relationship between the amount of deep sleep and attention and inhibition and social identification. So we came up with 3 predictions. First one being higher quantities of deep sleep would correlate to increased cognitive abilities, as shown by greater performance in the social cognition and inhibition cognitive task. And our second prediction is that higher scores on cognitive tests that will be shown in individuals that get a higher quantity of deep sleep. And our final prediction is that lower scores will be shown in individuals that had a smaller duration of deep sleep. The result constructed partially support the stated hypothesis. So figure 1 in our result section shows that the difference between proportions of sleep between the controlled and experimental group. It was seen that members of experimental group obtain larger proportions of deep sleep in comparison to the control group. And figure 2 and 3 display the distribution of attention task scores and social task scores respectively. The scores were higher for both the attention task and social tasks. In the experimental group, in comparison to the control group, this result suggests that higher proportion of deep sleep attributes to higher task scores. These results fall in line with similar results stating that sleep is important in cognitive function and less sleep results in decreased ability to perform tasks. The results in figure 4 display the correlation value between deep sleep and social and attention task scores. In both experimental groups, the correlation for social tasks and attention task scores were positive, suggesting that increased deep sleep leads to increased scores. This sentiment was only similar in the control group regarding social task scores. Sleep is an important factor in cognitive success, and a decreased amount of it can equate to poor cognitive performance. While insignificant, the results from figure 5 show that there is strong correlation regarding the sleep and social task scores, but not on the attention task scores. The tasks were completed during different scheduled weeks, where the social is during the onset of the candlelight challenge. While that is the case, the results demonstrate that deep sleep is a predictor in social task scores, as seen in figure 7. Other factors excluding deep sleep may have been attributed to the performance of cognitive tasks, such as the biological facts, wake feel, REM sleep, deep sleep, sleep index. Figure 6 and 7 shows that along with deep sleep, REM sleep, and the sleep index may also be positive contributors regarding cognitive ability, as the crest has similar formation to that of deep sleep. But there are limitations that could have caused deviation to the results in this study. The main resulting factor where errors would result from is a lack of uniformity regarding experimental methods and compliance. There were participants in the study who are not able to contribute data due to the lack of data collecting devices, meaning the small sample size was further reduced. The individuals who had the recording device may have not followed the rules exactly as stated due to the other constraints such as work or school. The sleeping environment for the participants was all adverse. Furthermore, the lack of time to accumulate sleep conditions for the experimental group could have been an affecting factors regarding results. Future study could possibly benefit by conducting the experiment in a controlled environment with more participants, where all participants are observed and the sleep setting is consistent across all trials over a longer period of time.
So to conclude, the overall intention of the study was to determine the relationship between deep sleep and its effect on cognitive abilities. As I'm sure we all know, sleep is one of the most essential necessities for humans, and there are many negative consequences attributed to having a lack of it. Humans evolved to decrease their sleep duration to allow for more time to complete other things, such as the consolidation of tasks. With this evolution, it became extremely important to obtain efficient sleep provided the opportunity to do so. As we have further advanced as a species, changes to our environment and habits have created mismatches affecting our sleep. Sleep deprivation has been linked with poor performance on cognitive tasks, further insinuating the importance of sleep regarding cognitive function. This study peers more into the field of sleep and its functions. It can be seen through the results that it appears that deep sleep positively attributes in cognitive function, with greater amounts equating to better performance and vice versa. This falls in line with previous studies stating that sleep is a positive contributor to cognitive function. While the results were insignificant, meaning that we cannot accurately say increased levels of sleep equate to better performance in cognitive tasks, this study can provide the baseline work for future studies to further explore this topic. I would like to appreciate everyone for listening to our study, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you.